I'm glad you mentioned Grenfell because that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up because that's the point at which I think in the past maybe 10, 15 years where it's been where the difference between the experiences of different classes of people in Britain has been most exposed, I think. And the reality, I know, and I saw so many takes about it that were just like, oh well, how did this happen? Like they can't, like people can, I can't even fathom how the decisions that were made that led to what happened. Like it is like it's a form of like murder by negligence on a scale that's
Yeah,
disgusting,
yeah,
and the sort of lack of consequences is also disturbing, like really
yeah.
disturbing. So like,
But begin to when you look at it, then what you see is a lot of the kind of what's regarded as the middle class norms and middle class conventions, or the ruling class conventions. You know, the structure of a corporation, for example, chains of accountability,
yeah,
how disciplinary procedures work. I mean, a politician has to refer themselves to a standards committee if they are suspected of wrongdoing. Another person can be deported within a couple of days' notice for producing the wrong form. So there's disproportionate consequences for perceived wrongdoing, and that really underscored a lot of this initially. But then there's also the structures and mechanisms by which people are protected from consequences. So despite the fact that you've got people who are very conservative who believe in personal responsibility, I can't really think of one conservative politician or one conservative political leader at any level of governance over the last 10 years who's held their hands up and said, I fucked up, you know, in any instance, whether it be a lot of the germinal events that led to the Grenfell fire, whether it be even stuff going on in the very top flight of politics. They always have a way of worming their way out of things. They always have a way of doing that. And it's not just because they're very skilled manipulators, it's because there's a whole infrastructure that exists of consultants and advisors and little mechanisms that mean that yeah, corporate personalities accept responsibility for things and individual people don't.
mm,
And this is really what helps to place the truth of Grenfell in obscurity until it's really dug into through a lot of public anger, which then obviously means that the books have all got to get opened and looked at. And the thing about Grenfell as well is this idea was a freak event. There were fires in London of a similar nature prior to that in the preceding years, and as well as the warnings of the Grenfell Action Group, which were just you know just disturbingly prescient. And so it was just something about that situation, I think, that really did help to remind people of what's at stake when your society is not only falling into kind of some sort of moral disrepair, but also when the consequences of being complicit in that can be eluded, because we've got over 70 people who lost their lives. There's still people who are probably still homeless or residentially unstable as a result of that. The trauma in that community is going to be multi-generational,
mm.
and yet still no one's been held accountable for it.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
I don't even think the council got a fine or anything. Like yeah, it's and it really is.
The insurance company knew more about the dangers of the cladding than the council did. So if you go in, and there was a lot more detail in the chapter, and some of it had to be taken out because it was just you've got to kind of take into consideration how readable it is.
Mhm.
But there was a lot of stuff that I produced in the chapter, which I think I maybe just allude to now in a line or two, which is that insurance companies, had assessed the whole thing. And so they understood the risks about fire safety in terms of the gentrification of that building
Mhm.
better than the local authority that was running it from a distance. And that tells you everything that you need to know. Really, the people running that council, they didn't really give a shit, and then suddenly, you know, once they're taking out the corpses, then everyone's very sad and upset. But the truth is, that's the sort of thing heads need to roll to send a unequivocal signal to people in that social class. You know, if you take a position of high responsibility that's well paid and you have power and connections, and you fuck up on this kind of scale, then you can end up in the slammer as well as the person who was on the front page of a paper a few days after the fire, who was found to be robbing a dead body or something. You know what I mean? Like, you're just as bad, you know. So in you go, have a few months in jail or a few years, hopefully.
Yeah, and that sort of that feeling that like heads should roll for something is, and this lack of consequences that we kind of touched on a few times for people of a certain social class or a certain position of power is really the issue. It's the reason for a lot of the anger, I would say, and probably also like not just on a in a sense of people's like mistrust or anger towards institutions. I think it's very much at the root of the collapse of a lot of our institutions, that they've become like horrible, disfigured imitations of the thing that they were designed to do, or the, you know, the laws they were designed to uphold, or, you know, whatever function it might be, whether we're talking about you know, the NHS, or, you know, social services, any,
Policing.
yeah, any policing, exactly, like any of these things. Why do you like, when do you think it was that we stopped demanding those sorts of consequences?
Well, when I think a kind of apathy sets in when you see disproportionate consequences between social classes. You start thinking this is just the way it is. What's the point in challenging it? And so I think what politicians have got have started to do quite skillfully is to be distracting us with you know, culture war stuff and stuff that I wouldn't say is not important. You know, I don't take the position that anyone out there who has an issue about illegal immigration is acting on complete falsehoods or is driven by xenophobia and bigotry. I think most people begin from a place where, you know, their concerns could be characterized as understandable or legitimate based on the information that they have. But what politicians help to do is to actually take people who are in a place where they can be reasoned with and bring them further along a kind of conveyor belt towards less and less rational positions on things. They begin to draw connections between different things. And so if you turn on GB News with the fallout from this whole Philip Schofield episode, you'll see them trying to braid together different elements, with ITV apparently being a woke broadcaster. This is the same broadcaster that ran Jeremy Kyle show Into the Ground and kept on broadcasting it until someone literally died. This is the broadcaster that has no editorial slant, no house style, never originates anything, is literally just a bunch of commercial incentives producing things in a zombie-like state, armed to the teeth with public relations experts, right? There's nothing woke about ITV, but GB News sees an opportunity here to move into a new position in our culture through this Philip Schofield story by not just talking about the ins and outs of that, but then bringing in wokeness, right? The ITV's woke, then bringing in something about, you know, Prince William or his wife. And so what they do is they create this impression that all of that is interconnected. And for a politician, that means that the terrain is much easier to navigate, because all they have to do is point to the go-to folk devil of the day whenever any serious issue is being discussed. And because people are so stressed out, because people are so emotionally vulnerable, and because we have all this build-up of prior resentments about prior unrelated issues, it's like a couple getting into an argument almost where they start casting up things that happened 2 years ago, 5 years ago. They start talking in hyperbole. You always do this or you always do that. And once you're in that terrain, it's all irrational discussion. And politicians, they can whip people up into a frenzy through that. And that makes everyone a lot easier to manage. So I think that that's really how they've managed to paper over the cracks of class inequality, because they do that divide and conquer technique. And then obviously parties more to the left of that, Starmer's Labour project, you can see how they truly feel they have no option but to just out-Tory the Tories.
Yeah.
Because they recognise if they were to speak sensibly about things, that's not going to get the front page. And that was the case particularly when they went after Sunak around him apparently, being lenient on child abusers. That was a dirty, nasty type of campaign. But the reason they stuck by it was because all the advice that they were getting was, no one's going to know what your policy is unless you take this tone and this strategy. And that's why they never apologised for it. And unfortunately, that just moves the Overton window more and more to the non-rational type of discourse that we see.
Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.